my name is Kami Krista. I graduated from St. Georgen in 2017. I'll add another bit. I actually joined St. Georgen in 2009, so I was there at a very early time of the school. And my current work, occupation is hard to put a specific name on it. I'm an entrepreneur. I run a company, a startup called Elio, and officially my title is CEO. So what we have gone out to solve at Elio is what we call the implementation gap in climate action and sustainability more generally. So the problem that we've identified is that this is the macro scale problem. I'll get into specifically what we're doing, but I think this is super helpful. The macro scale problem is that we're generating a lot of very specific, more sustainable solutions, like more sustainable materials, more sustainable processes, research on improving particular manufacturing processes. But then the people who are actually responsible for designing products at the end of the day, right? Like whether it be a building or whatever t-shirt or hoodie you wear, or in the case of the industry we're first focusing on, medicines, they are actually not really able to consider those more sustainable alternatives as it stands right now. There's a lot of hurdles to that. And so we bridge that gap, we solve that issue by providing these scientists, process engineers, product designers with a software tool that allows them to consider sustainability as a design criteria. And our first focus is on the pharmaceuticals industry. And within the pharmaceuticals industry, what we're really doing is we're helping these scientists and process engineers select more sustainable inputs to their manufacturing processes, like a more sustainable reagent or a more sustainable pipette tip. You might know that from biology class, for example. An easy one is to say, the lifelong love of learning. That's like, it's a very straightforward one. No day looks the same. Just as an example, like yesterday, I needed to learn about like international trade and tariffs, and not specifically tariffs in terms of how to implement them, but the consequences on like US dollar to euro exchange rates, and determining how to hedge our different currencies or not, or what are we going to do, because we're actually, although we're a small company, we actually have a semi-complex setup. We have an American like holding entity because we started in the US, and now we have an Austrian daughter or subsidiary, and so we actually hold both euros, US dollars, and British pounds because we also have an employee in the UK. So like yesterday, I woke up to, the, geopolitical changes that are happening globally. And I was like, oh, shoot, I need to figure out, we have to figure out where we put our cash and our money and make sure we don't lose. And so I spent a decent number of hours yesterday, like 3 hours, trying to figure that out. And I think maybe that's all, it's not necessarily listed here, but I think you can only, like, learning is not a solo sport, right? Like you do it with others, and you rely on people to teach you things or to share their knowledge. And so yesterday what I did is I called up several of our investors, one of which is, the former CEO of one of the biggest banks here the biggest bank, I think, in Austria, but one of the biggest in Central Eastern Europe. And then another friend who, used to do a bunch of hedge fund management, and then another friend who's like a, bigger investor. And I was just like, what would you do? Like, how do you think about this? Tell me, because, I don't. And I think something that is inherent to this sort of lifelong love of learning is also being very comfortable with the idea of saying, I don't know, and being willing to be taught, and being, quote unquote, not the smartest person in the room. I think that's also, to a certain extent, something I will honestly say, something I learned a lot more after I left STGIS. I think it was the lifelong love of learning was there, but I think I honed in on this sort of aspect of saying, oh, I don't know. I think I was very comfortable in saying, I don't know if I knew a lot already. But if I was just starting out somewhere, I was wanted to first get to a certain level of mastery on my own before I kind of branched out. So one of the things actually now I have had to learn over the last years is there's so little time, right? Like I had basically a day to figure this out, and I had at least 8, 9, 10 hours of other work I needed to do. So I just didn't have a lot of time to figure this out. And so that means you end up actually approaching this whole like learning aspect in a very, I would say, in an even better way, in an even more holistic way, in a more humble way. So I think that's a huge aspect. And one last point on that point is like at an early stage startup, you don't have, that's why I said, when you say what's my occupation, I can say I'm an entrepreneur, but that doesn't really tell you anything about my day-to-day life, because we're a small team. I mean, we're going to grow to like 6 people in the next few months, but even then it's a small team. We're like 3 plus a bunch of part-time people now. So I wear the hat of doing sales, product, designing sustainability scores, right? Running all of this administrative stuff, figuring out like how to make sure we comply with tax laws in many different jurisdictions. Of course, we have people who help us with, bits and pieces of that. But at the end of the day, I have to figure all of these things out on my own. I design our website. I've coded our parts of our website, like not our like tool for the customers, but like just our public facing website. I need to figure out comms, and there's just so many bits and pieces, and I can't be an expert in all of them, but I can always figure out how can I quickly learn something. And I think that is definitely something I learned and honed the skills of how to do while I was at SCGIS, because there was so many different things on offer, so many fantastic also teachers, of course you, John, and so many more to mention, who also didn't just teach, but also I think you know this already, but for the people listening, I think Sigurgun does a very good job actually, and thanks to the way that teachers teach, in enabling students to gain autonomy in how they learn, and so that's definitely that's the foundation. Without that, I couldn't run Elio. Like it would be impossible. In terms of like integrity and passion and excellence and a positive impact in the world, I mean, that's at the end of the day how we run the company, right? So we actually just did this exercise over the last like a few weeks, where we said, okay, we're bringing new people on board, we're growing, significantly, like we're doubling the size of our team, and we need to find ways to communicate our values and how we operate. Like we all know there's a shared sense amongst 3, technically 4 of us before that, but in this sort of transition period, we've gone down to 3, and so what we came, and there's still some polishing to do, but what it came down to is we wanted to capture a few core pieces of how we operate. The first one is like what we call like an intentional self-tuner. So someone who is at a certain level of self-awareness about themselves and their own operating system, and they're they are intentional about their own personal growth as an individual, so they can show up better for the people around them, including the team, and so on. And intentional also means with intention towards a particular purpose, because you can be self-aware and you can grow, but you could also grow to be maybe to do certain things that I would at least not align with, or I wouldn't consider to be purposeful or highly impactful or positive impact. And so that's a really core aspect of how we operate, because once you're at that level of understanding your own operating system, then that enables all the other pieces, right? That enables you to be humble because you have a sense of self-worth that is grounded and independent of the things you do or the outcome you produce. So you're not dependent on being this, the person who takes credit for something, or You are not afraid to make mistakes. You're not afraid to fail, not afraid to try, because your self-worth isn't tied to the outcome of what you do. And the other sort of really key piece is it when you think about excellence, like excellence means being willing to get, feedback. What we like to say within Elio is that we operate with strong opinions loosely held. It's very Silicon Valley speak, but basically what that means is you need to have an opinion, because if you don't have an opinion, then like there's no conversation to be had. You're just like floating along with the current, right? But it's really important in order to reach excellence as a team and as company, to leave the door wide open to change your mind. If someone else comes along and says, what, I think this could be a better way of doing it. Or you speak to your customers, and the customers suddenly you realize like the problem you thought you were solving is not that problem, it's a different problem, right? You need to be willing to be kind of, this goes back to sort of humility and asking for help. Excellence, I think, can only be achieved, or excellence as a group is greater than excellence as an individual. So you've got, if you try to achieve excellence all on your own, it's like a local optimization, versus if you try to achieve excellence within a group, then you get to the real maximum. And that excellence still requires you to be self-aware and thereby be able to be humble, receive feedback, etc. And then when it comes to like the positive impact and so on and so forth, the key, this is such a foundational piece of how we've designed the company. So what we have coined it as now I can throw in these like terms. If you would have talked to me a few weeks ago, I would have just had a whole description, but we call it a regenerative giver. So we want people who join us to be regenerative givers, and that's also how we operate within the company. What does that mean? So kind of the tagline we have for that, or we've at least so far have for that, is to give more than you take, from the planet, from customers, the team, and yourself. Let's start with the first one, because that's the most important one first, and then, or most important in terms of, that's like the biggest piece, and then we have more and more concentric circles. So planet, at the end of the day, yes, we're a company, but our mission is very clear, which is as a first step to bridge this implementation gap. But why? In order to help reestablish harmony between humans and the rest of the natural world, in order to design products that we use in a way that helps reestablish that harmony. Now, there's a long way to go, of course. Then there's a lot of other pieces that are involved in that, not just designing more sustainable products, but that's a big piece of it. And the trick here is that companies currently operate in a system that doesn't support that. So our current form of capitalism, what some may call neoliberal capitalism, is one that overprivileges only one capital, financial capital. But there are many other capitals that our world relies on: natural capital, human capital, and social capital. And so if we're going to actually solve this bigger problem, we need to be able to operate companies in such a way that they maximize value across these capitals and not maximize value locally within financial capital. The problem is that we've chosen to do the latter, and our entire world is basically financialized. So if we would have blinders on, and if we didn't have a very clear vision, and going back to, I guess, the passion piece and having a positive impact on the world, what we risk is that we might build a really great product, we might be financially successful, but we will completely miss the positive impact, because we will build a company that basically overprivileges profit making over having that holistic impact on regeneration of the world. Now that all sounds like kumbaya and so on. What does that mean in practice? Well, very practically, what we've done is we've actually incorporated the company in a different structure. So our top level company is a so-called public benefit corporation. And so what a public benefit corporation does is it allows companies to basically maximize their mission statement, because companies currently are legally obliged to maximize shareholder value. If you have a traditional C Corp and you are a director in that C Corp, you have a legal obligation to maximize shareholder value. And if you don't do that, your investors can sue you, and you can be held liable for that. Which is in direct conflict with what I was just saying about having a positive impact on the world, because ultimately our mission relies on not maximizing profit making to the extreme. And so that's why we've incorporated it as a public benefit corporation. That's also why, when we think about practically the product that we build, we don't focus solely on one particular sustainability metric like CO2 emissions, but we provide and we assess kind of sustainability in a holistic way across many different impact dimensions, for example. There's many other examples of this, but this is really embedded in how we've designed the company, how we've incorporated it, and how we operate day to day. And it's also embedded in how we then operate with our partners, with our customers. Like the whole idea is to leave more value on the table, to see them as partners in this bigger mission. We're going towards this mission together. They're like part of the team. They're not an entity that we're gonna just purely sell to and squeeze money from, but the exchange of money is just what is needed to symbiotically work together towards this mission. That's kind of how we see it. And so that comes to this sort of integrity piece. Well, if we wouldn't do all these things, then we would be lying to ourselves about the real impact we're trying to make here, and whether what we're doing actually is going to be a leverage point in first of all, reducing the impacts of climate change, but more broadly, supporting a bigger consciousness shift within our society, to redesign our world such that we live in harmony with it and not against it.